Baha'i Faith in the world today. Is there a difference between the Baha'i Faith in the world today and the time when Baha'u'llah and the Bab appeared and first gave the Baha'i teachings? Shoghi Effendi describes in his writings, drawing of course from Abdul Baha's teachings and Baha'u'llah's own explanation, the imponderable, immense role of the manifestation of God when He appears in the world. Everything is destined to change. It doesn't change immediately. It changes in so many invisible ways that are described, but you can't quite tell what the change is going to be yet, you know. Some years ago, in 1995, I was in a peace conference in San Francisco. Different people from parts of the world were giving talks about this. And there was the secretary of the Club of Rome. If you've heard of the Club of Rome, it's kind of a club of intellectuals in Europe that were far-seeing, and Irving Laszlo was the secretary, and happened to be the man I was having lunch with. And he was reading some of Shoghi Effendi's writings, and he was commenting on how extraordinary different things that he was so surprised there, that far-seeing that it seems like the world is moving towards those goals but hasn't reached them yet. And I mentioned to him about the vibrating influence of the New World Order of Baha'u'llah that he, in the Holy Book, Baha'u'llah, in his own Holy Book, he describes that this New World Order is like a vibrating influence that's changing the whole character of the world. I say, how is that possible? What's going on? And when I mentioned that, he said, oh my goodness, he said, that's, what year did he say that? And I said, about 68, 1868. And he said, that's years ahead of Prigogine, who was the first one to talk about this in scientific terms. So I was getting really interested. Okay, what's this science of Prigogine? Ilya Prigogine was Russian. He came to Belgium, and he's a chemist, and he took the Nobel Prize that year for his explorations of what he calls dissipative structures. A little patience, see if I can explain this in a nice way that we all understand it. A dissipative structure is like an entity that functions okay. It's an entity that has rhythms and developments of its own. Your body would be a dissipative structure. He found it in all kinds of chemistry. Laszlo said it's like could be like a traffic plan in a city. That would be an entity of a sort, which works fine unless people do things that they shouldn't do, like they drink too much and cause accidents, or he says too many cars arrive and then the whole thing doesn't work. The dissipative structure, he said, is a stable, balanced entity that you can introduce new elements into, and if it's strong enough, it absorbs the elements. So, how many new cars can the city take before the thing breaks down, and you have to design some new way for it to work? But there are then influences, external influences into all these different levels of entities. You can imagine all the different kinds you could propose, where the influence of the outside is so great that the entity can't absorb it, and the entity begins to disintegrate. It comes apart. But it doesn't come apart forever. It comes apart, and then together with the new influence, it creates a new field of balance in the world, which is what he understood. And I thought I was trying to understand that too, but he was saying that that's what Baha'u'llah has come. He's come and he's breathed a new revelation into the world, and he's set standards and he's set goals for mankind. He's established principles by which the whole of the society has to readjust itself. And then he's announced that on top of that, because it's a new day, and these energies have to bring mankind to the stage of maturity, he describes how the social evolution of mankind is paralleled with these progressive revelations from prophets of the past. Some of them have introduced us in this particular, what he calls a universal cycle in the Baha'i writings, long period, 500,000 years of the growth of humanity, which ours started with Adam. It's only 6,000 years ago. We're really just, still in diapers here. And then that evolves, and he says, as it evolves, the sciences, arts and sciences of a higher kingdom, which is the place we go when we pass away, that's a complete full society, much fuller than here, much more active, busy with universities, everything. That society, through influence in spiritual ways, he said, inspires new arts and sciences in the world. And all of this is connected, again, to something that's constantly evolving and redesigning itself. I find that fascinating. I think that tells us where we are today. The Baha'i world, in the world today, is in a stage of interaction between the driving, irresistible influence of this vibrating new world order that Baha'u'llah has envisioned. Whoever aligns themselves with anything that helps unify mankind, that helps and integrate its social order, is confirmed. It goes forward. Okay, if you introduce, corruption into it and things, it may break down and not last. But mostly those things are all going forward. So all kinds of, because of the nature of the human race, there's all kinds of developments which at first are used illicitly, and then gradually they settle down and they become part of life. I was saying to a fellow who's founded a large school at Oxford University, a gentleman who was one of the original founders of modern sciences of communication here in the UK and in the world. And I was saying, it's such a pity that the internet was being used so much for pornography, just as a comment. And he said, it's always that way. So I'm listening, and he says, radio started off. The first radio broadcasts, he said, were dirty songs. That was what everybody was interested in hearing, that you couldn't hear anywhere else. And he said, the radio took a long time. Don't think of radio as a medium of pornography anymore. So television the same way. He said there were private channels showing pornography on television that drove the development of it in a huge way. So mankind's passions also are sometimes employed in these terrific changes. And then it settles down. And so we see these things happening, all kinds of things. Now, I'm introducing some topics just so that maybe you start thinking about them in a way that you maybe not have thought about them before, or maybe you can contribute some greater conclusion to it. The Bab says that the verses of God, they have a power. The verses that the revelation, that the prophets of God reveal, is not the ordinary speech of man. It takes the form of ordinary speech, but it's not ordinary speech. It has a potential in it that develops all kinds of other things. And in the Bible, for instance, in Isaiah and in other places, there are implications that the Word of God does not return to its maker or to its source void. And there is no way that the energy of that is not going to be used for something. So the Bab says that the verse of God goes out, it comes to an individual, they hear it. If they absorb it, if it lifts them, if they vibrate, if you will, with the vision of that, what's being said, it's light for them, it's illumining. if they resist it and attack it, and they don't want it, it's against their personal desires and the ambitions that they have for their company or whatever it is, it turns to fire in them. It becomes like the California forest fire. It just starts taking over and burning out all kinds of things. So the attitude that people have to the Baha'i teachings is just not such an easy matter. It gravely affects the way society moves forward. And so we see this description of a vast battle between the forces of light and darkness. There's two sides, there's two poles here. And this is why it's a religion and not some kind of other strange movement. We've got the pole of the love of God, the requirement of the love of God, and then we have the established love of self that's in the individual. And it's between these two that the battle's constantly going on. And somewhere in between here we're standing with free will. And we choose ego or we choose the love of God. The love of God is the love of the verses. The means, we're told in the writings of Abdu'l-Baha, the means of the Holy Spirit, the Divine Spirit, the vitalizing force that awakens our vision and allows us to live as another kind of human being, not just an animal, but something beyond that. That's inherent in the verses. This results in certain laws and admonitions of Baha'u'llah, where he says, repeat the verses of God every morning and every evening. We have prayers that are in different categories. We have admonitions to painstakingly study the Baha'i literature when you become a Baha'i, so that you know what it is, so that when you open your mouth to say something about it, something real comes out. And you have strong statements saying that if that doesn't happen, your words will take no effect in the listeners. And sometimes, we worry, why I'm trying to tell people about it, but they're not interested. Well, we need to, kind of wind up our own understanding. There's another thing. Maybe this sounds too, esoteric metaphysic, but I believe that there's a whole, the potentialities in each human soul are hidden from us, and they're awakened by these verses. So as you read and as you meditate and ponder on the meaning of the verses, they lock into positions. They crystallize your consciousness. Your consciousness is like kind of a murk of all kinds of borrowed knowledge from school, from parents, from media, from nonsense all over. It's all mixed into nobody knows what to believe, At least we've got a pattern we're starting to move towards. As we obey the manifestation of the time we live in, those things begin, the murk of it all, the confusion of it all begins to crystallize. And then it attracts light, and it refracts light. And we move towards what Abdu'l-Baha says in the Divine Plan, in which nobody's talking about much anymore because it sounds so impossible. He says, the friends must become incarnate light, incarnate spirit, and then their breath will change the very rocks. Now, is that time over? Have we left that time? Have the revelation, it's too far, that's too religious? Or do we just not understand it? Or do we understand it? Are we moving towards it? Okay, how do we resolve this, In the Baha'i community, we have a terrific program of collective activities, very important. Okay, this is the House of Justice plan for how the consolidation and the entry by troops will come about. We're all supporting that as best we can. The problem is that we sometimes want to derive our spiritual growth and inspiration from those activities. My own particular take on this is that we need to go back to the individual responsibility before the collective responsibility. The individual responsibility to look at the writings and see what we're called upon to do and accomplish so that we can contribute to the collective one in a positive, solid way. Otherwise, we start bickering with each other, and pretty soon people say, I'm all burned out. I've been to 10 of these cycles of growth, and there's no growth, and Okay, who's not growing, you know, in this situation? Kind of. So it seems impossible with all the demands on our time and everything to take time to read certain basic books of the faith. And the Guardian said we need to read the Gone, the Book of Certitude. We need to read some answered questions of Abdullah. And he suggests mastering the Dawnbreakers, the tales of the Dawnbreakers, because it's such a source of the potential of what man can become, what kind of spirit can come into the human being. And then, you know, we're told we should arise and become beacons of light. And now, beacons of light is not, I mean, it's just not, you know, blinding light that you want to share with people. The light is actually love of God. It's the whole heart of it is love of God. So if we see people who actually love God, I think it's supposed to make a difference. How is it you're so happy all the time? How is it you seem to know something I don't know? You know, the Baha'is have this experience. I'm sure you've had your experience. You've talked to somebody. You're always smiling. What's the matter with you? In this world now, it's strange. So, in the global experience, now we've got these processes of integration and disintegration. The disintegration is all those institutions which are not integrating. They're moving the other way, so they come apart. Because there's no energy or support for them in the creative process. They seem to have their moments, but then they burn out, you know. These movements, you think, oh, this is going to be, you know, communism, Marxism, or something comes along, and you say, oh, this is going to solve the problem. No, not quite. It creates more problems, and then we go forward and invent something else. As far as we can tell, the Baha'is have been very slow in delivering the faith. Now, there's two reasons that this has happened, and you'll hear people say very strange things, like, we were following Shoghi Effendi, but his method doesn't work. God help us to reach such a conclusion as that. His method was never done, never carried out properly. That's what's the matter with it. And that's this whole thing of consolidating our knowledge and absorbing the luminosity of the teachings to the point where we can begin to have an impact on society. Now, there were great teachers and pioneers and knights of Baha'u'llah that went out and did those things. But the model of that is fading, and now we're thinking, you know, we need to be social activists kind of thing. The social activism, okay, maybe makes a solid contribution, it's a help. It certainly makes people, when they hear about the faith, say, oh, that's nice, you know. Or you tell somebody about the Baha'i teachings and they say, I'm so glad you found something that's good for you. Yeah, I mean, nice to hear. How are we presenting Baha'u'llah's faith if we get that answer? You know? But that's the problem, that's where the people are. And you have to kind of measure where they are and what you can give them. Abdul says that the Baha'i teachings are like a medicine chest. The solution, the remedy for everybody's ailments is there. But you need to take a little time to try to discern what the ailments of the people are so that you can apply the remedy or suggest a remedy to them, offer a remedy to them, which would be the first thing they would need to take in order to get strong enough to take other remedies. The Guardian said that the Baha'i principles are like milk, and the Baha'i laws are like meat. You've got to give a long period of milk until they grow teeth, and when the people grow teeth, then you can say, okay, here are the laws. But the laws are challenging and tough and compared to the world. They're not so really that difficult when you compare them to the divine teachings of the past and think of what's best for mankind. So that's a challenge too. Integration is a question of gradually the Baha'is coming to have a knowledge of the cause, and that produces what Abdul says is a unity that surpasses religious unity or national unity or economic unity. It brings us into relation into what he calls a spiritual unity, where we're very supportive of each other because we're aware of the source of the light that's coming to us. The obligatory prayer becomes one of the pillars of that development, and fasting the other one. And those are two things, okay, and we don't want to introduce them to the public right away, although have you noticed in the Aktas where the law of fasting is introduced, Baha'u'llah says, "O peoples of the world, we have ordained a fast for you." Not, "O Baha'is of the world." You can tell your friends about that one. You know, when they say, "You're fasting," of course, you should be fasting too. This is the law given by God for everybody. Whoa. It's funny, sometimes people, non-Baha'is want to fast with Baha'is. I've seen that happen in different places, different circumstances. You say, "Oh, that's a challenge. Let me try that. Maybe, can I do that too?" Yes, you don't have to say, "No, it's for Baha'is." You can say, "Oh, peoples of the world, this must be inclusive of everybody." Such a law, such a great law, and it has such an influence throughout the world. And sometimes the Baha'is are busy and not quite focused, and they don't realize how important it is. And nobody can tell you, "Why don't you fast?" But certainly, all of the Baha'is should be encouraging each other to follow these laws. In that fast, in a 19-day period, you have a renewal of all these energies, or a quickening. That doesn't mean it's going to be fun or simple. They may be a terrific challenge. I remember a lady came up after I gave a talk in Mexico City years ago about the fast and the benefits of the fast, and she said, "I really like to fast." She said, "But, you know, it makes me hungry." Yeah. I didn't know how to answer that. I was kind of stumped, you know. So some of these things that seem, you know, so religious, and they're designed by God. If those are the two pillars that support our own spiritual life, and Shoghi Effendi says spirituality is the great need of the day, and it's what youth should be concentrating on, is this mystic relationship with God, and that means mystic relationship with the manifestation of God. That's kind of the center of the Baha'i Faith and the world today. Is if the Baha'is are doing that, then this process is moving forward in a different way. I think certainly a happier way for us as a Baha'i community. And if it isn't, the nature of those forces released by the Bab and Baha'u'llah, Shoghi Effendi assures us, and there's several quotations that say this, will lead mankind to the kingdom of God. He doesn't add the footnote which he told Keith Ransom Kaler when she was being prepared for a mission to go to Iran back in the 30s. He added to her, and it doesn't make any difference what the Baha'is do, it's coming and it will be fulfilled. This is the day of the fulfillment of the promises of the past. But he said the Baha'is, through their contribution, could assuage the violence of it to some degree. Not completely, but to some degree. And she said, "What do you mean?" And he said, well, for instance, a war that is needed to change this thing, a punishment in a sense that's really a means of healing of mankind, because each time we have a war, everybody comes out of it thinking we've got to solve this, we have to make a unified approach. We made a United Nations, but then it was designed in a way that it really doesn't have teeth to do what it needs to do, so that it's obviously we're going to have to go towards another round of that kind of universal consternation and difficulties to produce the federation of mankind, which is the lesser peace, which is the oneness of mankind in actuality that's supposed to come. And then Shoghi Effendi said that the lesser peace is the political unification of mankind, the federation of nations, the fulfillment of a quotation we all know, but I don't think we all have thought through the implications of as much as sometimes the House of Justice was talking about this. The earth is one country and mankind its citizens. One of the fundamental dimensions of that is that the resources of the planet, the natural resources of the planet, belong to the human race. They do not belong to this or that country. And therefore, some countries are robbing mankind of their wealth by saying this is ours, we're the source of diamonds for the world, and we get rich from it. And the girl student in Japan doesn't have any benefit from that. So there has to be a redesign of the whole nature of the world. And this is not internationalism, this is federation, this is the whole. And Shoghi Effendi said this, through the fire of war in the United States, the United States was forged. Now nobody imagines that, California and Nevada are going to go to war over something, because there's laws that reign and that happens. He says now mankind has to move to that stage where it recognizes the positive nature of World Federation, and the representatives of all the nations of the world have to participate in this and come to conclusions. Well, and they asked Abdu'l-Baha about it, and he said, we'll come. And he said, the world, the people, the nations of the world, who are basically selfish for the most part, will have to do this because they'll be forced into it by the circumstances of the effects of them ignoring the world order and its vibrating influence. I don't know if you're catching the idea of this. There's something going on, terrific forces going on here that are the source of all of this upset. The kings and rulers, they opposed Baha'u'llah, it was a sin of omission rather than commission. They just omitted to pay any attention. So what happens to kingship? It starts coming apart. And Baha'u'llah said the peoples of the world will rise up, and now we have democracy. And democracy looks like it's going to be wonderful, and now lately it's a whole lot of questions about whether democracy is really the best thing for us or not. The political situation, Baha'u'llah very wisely, and Abdu'l-Baha said that while we're not blind and we don't watch everything, don't involve yourself in it. It's given by God to the rulers, elected rulers, appointed rulers, the traditional rulers, whatever. They're responsible to Him, and we can't be rising up in rebellion. But outside the faith, there's all kinds of forces, as you know, are rising and doing things, and terrorism and so many other things that move mankind. I don't know, I should think there'd be enough ideas there that maybe you could grab a hold of one and throw it around or do whatever you want with it. Nabil is smiling. I'm sure Nabil is thinking, that's not the talk I thought he was going to give. But
better than the talk.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you so much. So,
one thing, can I add something else?
by all means.
That is this from the Master. The Master says, if you want to understand things, observe them carefully, because every particular is a design in miniature of every universal. So everything universal will be reflected in the individual, and the individual also if you observe carefully, becomes the pattern of the universal. What does he mean by that? He said spiritual truths act at all the different levels of reality. How about? He says, for example, the human soul is the source of sustenance for the design of the body and its sustenance. It's sustained by the soul. The soul's acting in it at all times. The intelligence of the soul, unseen, is a force which keeps us alive and thinking and saliva in our mouth and digesting your breakfast, which you probably don't know how to do by yourself. Do you? I don't know. Do we take credit for things that really they're going on? It's a constant service we have, and we just ignore it. This is so strong, this idea of we don't belong to ourselves. I mean, we don't choose the moment we want to be born. We don't choose the moment we want to die. There's all kinds of things in between we can't choose. But there's a whole lot of choice every day of things we have to choose between. which is what's appropriate, what's in line with the divine admonitions and recommendations, and what's opposed to it. And if you take an action towards one side, it's clear you get a double reaction. You mess with somebody you shouldn't mess with it, then it becomes twice as difficult to not mess with it again. It tends to make a habit that way. But also if you do the spiritual part of it, it also strengthens. You stand up for something just and correct, that gets strengthened apart from that. So this soul is there, and it's aware of every cell of your body. You know, you don't have to be taught by book learning whether you're hot or cold, whether you're happy or sad. These are things they're inherent in your nature. You know them right away. So Abdu'l-Baha said, the manifestation of God, in the same way that the soul is in charge of all the cells of the body, the manifestation of God has one level of his being is a universal reality which is encompassing all of the human race. So we're all cells in the body of the manifestation. He has another level of consciousness that we can't understand, and on that he says the all-knowing physician takes the pulse of mankind. Why is it you're able to pray to God and you feel the closeness of that, and you're able to do that anywhere, all simultaneously, you know. I wanted to say my prayers, but I thought he's probably busy today, you know, or something. The world is in a mess, so. But no, manifestation is made for that. Now think of when you say this wronged one, the title of Baha'u'llah, this wronged one, where he says that no one has ever suffered what he's suffering. He suffers it because he's aware of the potential of what could happen to the human race if they would just listen to him. And instead of that, they lock him up in a prison and they try to make him shut up, and they want to kill him if they can. And this is the nature of human society, the animal side of human society, and it's really disastrous. It's so sad. We're still facing that now. How many people have heard of Baha'u'llah's teachings? Okay, maybe we haven't delivered it very nicely. We haven't quite, you know. Like to the guy with the red nose, the first thing we say is, you know, Baha'is don't drink. That's a big help to kind of move you towards God, you know. Abdu'l-Baha says, beware, beware. You don't introduce anything from the Baha'i teachings at the beginning with a soul that will become an obstacle. Because the whole purpose of the whole revelation has come to move people towards God consciousness, towards realizing this light that's inherent in them, towards awakening it and developing it. So he has this knowledge that nobody else has this. Nobody can, his knowledge is incomparable with anybody else. I mean, there's no philosopher, there's no scientist that's going to have that kind of knowledge of everything. That this reality, which is another reality, higher than the human reality, it's a divine universal mind, it's a power that rules over everything. Where's all this coming from? Read the Gone. Read some answered questions. That's the base. That's the only. That was the PS.
Thank you so much.
Do you think it's possible to maintain individuality when we're all following the same writings?
Yes, I think there's no way that you can possibly be the same as anybody else. He says that every soul is like a leaf or a thumbprint. It has a unique expression of divine gifts and qualities, usually called the names and attributes of God. So he tells us that we are all created from dust, so we're all the same, one human race. But at the same time, we have to be the expression of all the names of God. Some of the names of God are the single, the unique. So it means that the expression of that name in your nature makes you different from your sister or from any of the rest of us. But when we act like animals, we seem very similar to each other. Is when these divine qualities and the sciences, the arts and sciences develop in us, then we have a distinction from each other, and we each make a contribution that nobody else can really make. Out of us is this jealousy of, oh, he's occupying my place, or she's doing what I should be doing. No, you know, I mean, I hope nobody is as blind as to say, I should have been elected to the assembly, not the lady who doesn't know anything. Oh, gosh, just thank God you're not elected to the assembly. Yeah, but anyway, so we are charged with developing those hidden potentials within us by doing very simple things like using the obligatory prayer versus morning and evening, and trying to act in accordance with the Baha'i teachings and to share the law of God and knowledge of this teaching with others in as wise a way as we're able to. And if we do that, this seed of the spirit that's in the soul, which germinates when we hear of the faith, or when we come alive, if we're Baha'i Zadehs, we come alive and we say, this is my faith as well. You know, we just saw this in the Holy Land. The kids would come and suddenly they'd say, my God, this is my religion as well as my folks' religion. I make it your own, you know. And that is like a moment of germination of this spirit that's latent within us, all those gifts that you have. Then it needs to be fed, and the Holy Spirit is the water of life, and it comes from the verses, it comes from constant interaction with the writings and teachings. That then develops the qualities of the soul. It plants these flowers of the kingdom that grow inside our consciousness, beautiful things. I remember I was very anxious as a new Baha'i. I was complaining, it's taking so long, I want to see all these spiritual changes in me right now. And they said, you know, you're a little like the gardener that's planted the plants, and the little plants are growing, and you keep pulling it up to see if it has roots and stick it back in the ground. It's not helping, just have a little patience. So actually you have a unique personality and gifts and developments that if you don't develop them through the influence of the revelation, they will be lost to the world order forever. That's a profound teaching, which I think is very encouraging to people, because they say, well, nobody else can play your role. You're unique. You have things to give that nobody else can give. Baha'u'llah, when he was asked about the next world, he said, you know, we'll go into the next world, and the believers will be drawn into the presence of the manifestations and prophets of God, who will inquire of them that which they've suffered in their earthly life. And okay, if you haven't had a very hard time, the interview might be rather short. Then he goes on and he says that another activity in the next world is you will wish to witness the reality of every sanctified soul. What is that? It means that our way of seeing God is seeing Him in each other. That when those facets are awakened in a soul, that gives us a further confirmation, another part of the gem of the divine reality that we should be perceiving. So that becomes so exciting, and this happens sometimes when we have a big Baha'i conference, and this power of the Spirit is so strong that you begin seeing some of these qualities coming out of people that you maybe not in their daily life. It's harder to express. So it's the people that don't follow the law of God that begin looking like all the same. Sheep running down the subway, coming out of the subway, running to the football games, rushing home to see the same television shows. That's sameness. That's an ugly sameness that you seem to be thinking that the faith might might have that influence on us if we're all following the same laws and the same teachings. But again, going back to the very beginning of the talk, those verses dynamize your inner being, crystallize in you in a way that they won't crystallize in somebody else. Each one of us has to explore that and has to make that contribution to the growth of mankind. Friends, these are ideas that I have from teachings, from studying the writings, but you have to go back and confirm them in the writings themselves. You know, don't believe anybody. No ex-house member, no present house member, nobody. Hands of the Cause made recordings, they're wonderful, inspiring, there's a whole upliftment, but they got things wrong too. I worked with them for years. I mean, sorry, we're all human beings, you know. You don't want to get overconfident about anything. So don't take my word for it necessarily, but maybe if this incites you to go and find the opposite, it'll be good for your scholarship. Good question. That was a good question. Thank you. Don't miss studying Shoghi Effendi. Highly organized. The revelation comes to the Prophet of God. It pulses out of him. It's impulsive. It comes at times that he's not necessarily in the best situation for, and he says, "Okay, dear friends, thank you very much. I'll see you later," and everybody has to leave. Well, then some of the friends said, "Why did he? You just got here and he told us to leave." Well, that's the time he's feeling the present implications that the revelation is there, ready to come, and it sometimes pulps out for long periods of time. Sometimes it's short. But in the case of Baha'u'llah, we've got 6 million words of Baha'u'llah registered in the computers in Haifa of his verses. I mean, it's just a tremendous revelation. The Bab, we've got 5 million. 5 million is all the revelations of the past, the length of all the possible combinations of revelations of the past, plus another 50% that the Bab adds to it of his own revelation. In other words, his own revelation is larger than all the revelations of the past combined. And then Baha'u'llah goes beyond that, you know. I used to say he trumps that, but I can't say that anymore. It's interesting when you use the verses and we use the prayers, sometimes the friends have dreams. It can't always be guided by dreams. In fact, Shoghi Effendi said, don't be guided by dreams unless you compare them with the teachings. If the guidance you received in a dream matches something in the Baha'i teachings, in tablets and instructions, that's fine, go ahead with it. But be careful, you know, because people say, oh, I'm guided by dreams, you know. I have automatic writing and not the word of God. So, do you have any other questions or comments? I don't know which ones. I'm hoping that there's some excitement in you to go back to the books now. Tonight you could go home and grab the prayer book or look at the Gleanings or do something.
I have been always jealous to the youth who had the opportunity to be in your classes of Kitab-e-Iman. Yeah. So if we could have, because we try to memorize phrases or then start from the beginning just memorizing. But I guess the way, I don't know, is it the way that we use it that much that we automatically know it off by heart? Or as you describe in your book, that it just categorize things. What is the right way to?
Well, I suppose we all have different study habits, but I've found it very helpful. I think Shoghi Effendi is suggesting certain things to us. He talks about reading and rereading the writings. Okay, that's a start. And then he talks about painstakingly studying, for instance, the Igon. Abdu'l-Baha says you should study the holy book should be studied, the whole book, the chapters, the verses, the words in the verses, and then the letters in the verses. So Bob interprets the letters of every letter of the words of a verse when he goes into it completely. You know, he's got the 3-verse surah called the Surah of the Kosar in the Quran. It's near the end. 3 verses. He's written 750 pages of commentary on those 3 verses. But then he first says, what's the meaning of the whole 3 together? What's the meaning of each verse separately? What's the meaning of every word of each verse? And then he goes into the letters and he interprets the letters and numerical meanings and implications. And this, in a sense, is this reflection of this idea that every particular is the reflection of a universal. All these things act on us as we're studying these words. The words may seem to not be relevant to the social problems of mankind at the moment, but they crystallize again. They crystallize into perceptions that will enable us to move forward in our careers, in our interactions with each other, in our administration of the affairs of the cause. All those things will start resolving themselves if we have an influx of more spirit. Now, the Igon is a book that I think is in first order to study. It's not always easy for people to study because the language is a little different from what they're used to. If you're trying to study it and English is your second language, even more complicated. The Persians who have it in Farsi, the original book, they say they came to understand the book much better through looking at the English translation of The Guardian. They say, oh, that's what that's about, you know, kind of thing. So don't lament entirely if you don't know the Farsi of the Igon to read it. But if you do, compare the passages. So we have the whole book there. Shoghi Effendi, a couple of years after he gave us that translation, he gave us the Gleanings. The Gleanings is a selection, a representative selection of passages from Baha'u'llah's writings on a whole lot of different subjects, a whole range of different subjects. It came out at a time, I understood from the friends who were talking, that were alive in that time talking about it, where Baha'is were, the seekers and inquirers were saying, well, you don't have any Bible. You know, you have these different books, but you don't have a Bible. So the Gleanings was really kind of a Bible substitute. This is the Bible of the Baha'is, and it is the Bible of the Baha'is in the sense, Shoghi Effendi wrote a letter, he said, this should be the constant companion of every believer. He hoped it would become the constant companion of every believer. Now, for a long time, people didn't have it, but you mostly can have it in your pocket these days because you can download it onto your phone, and then you've got it with you all the time. And on the subway, maybe you'll read some of it or something. So the Gleanings has 24 extracts from the Igon, collected by the Guardian into 6 sections of the Gleanings that are not sequential, they're in different parts of the Gleanings. It's not because there's different themes that are developed there. I found it very helpful to extract those out, and that's why they're in this book on the study, companion to the study of the Igon. Those particular passages are printed there, so it really gives you the essence of the Igon. There's a whole lot of other things that are there and necessary to know. Then Shoghi Effendi, God Passes By is such a guidance for us because it balances our minds, our understanding with regard to the major events and developments of the first Baha'i century. Without that divine eye of this sign of God on earth, I don't know how we would have ever gotten the thing proportionally divided. What's important, what's not important. You know, it's just that's a revelation in itself. Just that. And in this place where he reviews the literature that's has been revealed in Baghdad, he takes up the subject of the Igon. And he says, he characterizes it as the preeminent doctrinal work of Baha'u'llah. Doctrines, basic teachings, tenets. Look up these words and see what you can find. And that it's second only to the Kitab Yaqtas, because the Kitab Yaqtas is the source of the world order of Baha'u'llah for the future. So those are the sinews and laws that relate to the development of mankind as a whole. Whereas the Iqan is an enlightenment of your mind regarding spiritual dimensions. And he lists about 19 subjects that are there from the Iqan. I found it helpful that you take that list, it isn't a list, take it out and make a list. Make it the 19 points, and then as you read the Iqan, add the paragraph numbers where you think these subjects are reflected. Now that kind of work it's a busy work, but it keeps your mind alert. It's like when you're studying for an exam or something. You go, they might ask me about this, you know. It engages you so that you're not reading passively and meditating the rest of the time. As so often happens, I found letters to the Guardian the last few years that he's recommended to believers a couple of hours of study of the sacred writings of Baha'u'llah every day. I thought, my God, there's never any time to do that. I've never did it. The Baha'is haven't done it. What if all the Baha'is did that? Probably the world wouldn't come to a stop, but the Baha'i community would come to a stop. Then we have to say, but it might pick up after that, you know. Okay, so I said, I'm retired, let me do that. So I got out my book and sat down for the 2 hours, and it's about 12 minutes, I think, on an average that I would be on. You know, you have to start this before you're 80 years old. It's just when you're young and full of energy, coffee and other stimulants that you might have. So those, looking at all those topics pretty much puts you into the picture of the whole book. And I hope that the book that I've written, this companion to the Iqan, would be helpful. It's based on a number of other works that other Baha'is have written, some of them in Persian, and draws together certain letters that are out there published, but they're all dispersed. When you get them all together into the one book, when you get to the passage where it says Abraham lived 500 years, there's a letter from the Guardian that says this reference to years doesn't refer to the years as we understand them now. It wasn't that he lived 500 years in Gregorian calendar terms. Okay, that's because people trip over things like that. So the Guardian was answering these things. Noah made some promises that his followers would be freed from their enemies and attacks when a certain thing took place, and that thing didn't take place. Or Noah made another prophecy about, and then there remained only, Baha'u'llah says, 40 or 72 followers of Noah. Well, 40 or 72 in English sounds very strange. I mean, you know, it could be 40 or 50, but 40 or 72, what's the problem here, you know? But when you go into the hadiths, one of them says that there were 40 followers, and one of them says there were 72, and there are books of arguments in the Muslims about which is correct, which has the greater line of accuracy, you know. And Baha'u'llah doesn't get into that. He says 40 or 72, and you can still solve that problem later, and he moves on. So it's, explanations like that, I think, are, you know, just useful to not get caught in details of it. Then you would want to look at the dispensation of Baha'u'llah, where after all these statements about the greatness of Baha'u'llah and so on, there's in the section on Baha'u'llah, there's several paragraphs defining the Baha'i concept of God. What is God? There's a divine essence that's way behind this. Now, this is why I don't want to push your imaginations too far, but it's clear, Baha'u'llah has said in the writings, it's in the Gleanings, that every fixed star in the universe has planets, and every planet has creatures. Now, wherever there's creatures, you've got the highest expression of that are rational beings. Rational beings need manifestations of God to guide them, to awaken them to their potential. So Abdullah says there's no way to estimate the number of manifestations of God appearing to the creatures throughout the universe. Now, about the universe, we may have some need for delicacy in talking about these teachings, but we have to trust that they're right. Baha'u'llah says there's absolutely no beginning to the universe. It's a beginning without beginning, and it's an end without end. And creational stories are not sequences in time, but hierarchical dependencies. Okay? God is first before anything else, but everything else is always there at the same time. It's not, whereas it isn't like a sequence, you know, that he created this and then he created that and then that came apart, so he created this, and or he finished on Saturday and he said this didn't work out very well, I'm going to go do something else, or you know, you hear these strange things about. Now, the central orb of the universe is spiritual. Obviously, the spiritual orb is this essence of God that we have no way to conceive of. In fact, Shoghi Effendi says that any conception or thought about God is a human imagination and has no relationship whatsoever to God. So whoever you're worshipping in your mind as God is not God. But he still listens, and he seems to hear everything. He says he's close as the jugular vein, so he gets the idea from you, whatever you want. Now Abdullah says, be careful what you ask him for. He may give it to you, and it won't be good for you. You should trust and have trust that he's providing you. He knows your destiny, and if you put your life in his hands, if you put your future in his hands, all kinds of mysterious things develop, and you move along a path. It's my advice, he says to us, Abdullah. Ask for what God wants for you and not what you want for yourself. You know, don't ask him for things. This is an interesting principle because he's also generous and kind, and he says, you really need a Lamborghini? Okay. How is that going to help, you know? The other thing is it's very hard to pray to that God that you see as the power and ultimate intelligence and consciousness and awareness behind the whole universe, that, you know, my knee is a little sore. Okay, you know, it sounds so unrelated. That's why we have a manifestation. Shoghi Effendi says clearly in letters, you can pray to God if you want, if you think you can, but praying to the manifestation is more effective because he's placed there, and that's where the light comes to you. And you can pray to God and ask Baha'u'llah to answer things, or you can pray to God through Baha'u'llah, which is the correct way to address God. But lots of it we can actually ask Baha'u'llah to help, or we can ask Abdu'l-Baha. He says you can pray to the greatest holy leaf, you can pray to Abdu'l-Baha, you can pray to your great-grandfather if you want. Maybe he was a martyr in case of some of you. But in that case, you have to realize that you're asking them from their position to intercede with higher powers, so to speak. It's not, they are not able to perhaps provide the answer to your prayers, but they are able to intercede. And when the greatest holy leaf died, Shoghi Effendi wrote this marvelous letter begging the intercession of the greatest holy leaf. Go to Baha'u'llah and pray for, please ask him for mercy and bounties for all of the community. Very interesting. If we read the Baha'i history, if we study and we think about these heroines and heroes of the faith, most of them are men in the East, but they're predominantly women in the West. Great women teachers, Lua Getzinger and Martha Root and Keith Ransom Kaler and Juliet Thompson, Claire Dunn, Haydn gets into the list. He's kind of stands out there. He's the only man in the list for the West of these great servants of the cause, you know. You say, wow. And these women outrank members of the House of Justice because they've been hands of the cause. And so when people say, well, how is it that your supreme institution doesn't have women, you can say, we've had women that were of higher rank than these men that are serving there. It's an interesting point. It's just a little bit of a talking point because we usually just say, well, we don't know, you know. In the future, maybe we're going to be told that we will, yeah. In the time of the Guardian, he said that the hands of the cause are like the cabinet of the Guardian. They're the immediate aides of the Guardian, of him. Now, he was the head of the cause altogether, and the head of the House of Justice in the original scheme. And in the absence of a living guardian, the 36 years of guardianship of his writings became a very important element in the knowledge of the House of Justice and a guiding factor. Very, very important. The Guardian has said that without the Guardian, there's no one to define the sphere of legislation of the House of Justice. But he also, in a place, says they will never veer from their proper sphere of legislation, but the implication of that is that together with the Guardian they wouldn't, because he'd be checking them and telling them that's not a subject for you to act on, because in the writings, this verse here means that is not necessary. But in the meanwhile, during his ministry, maybe, I don't know, 100 letters, he's answered people and saying, this subject of one that comes to mind is not maybe the best one, but he says, okay, the question of birth control is not mentioned in the writings, so it goes to the House of Justice. They decided, and they've spoken on it, you know. We can use birth control, but not to ever have a child, just to avoid having a child for a period of time or after you've had children. But still, it shouldn't be permanent. Be that as it may, the point is that the supplemental legislation of the House of Justice has been broadly suggested by a series of letters, which enables the House to think, oh, this subject is very parallel to that one, and so on. Nobody could have imagined that they would be asked about gay marriage, for example. So something you couldn't have conceived that even in the 50s. You couldn't have even thought that was a subject. That's not a topic. What are you talking about? You're probably faced in teaching work, if you get very far into it, you're faced with those kind of questions. You know, what does the Baha'is say about that? And why don't they allow it? Okay. The approach I take, which is, the House just says we have no prejudice. At least we're moving towards removing what used to be pretty strong homophobia. That's been eliminated now. That's a great help, actually, in the community. Where is everybody going to go if they've got problems in the question of that, gender differences and so on is growing and expanding so much? Okay, where are they going to go for healing except to Baha'u'llah's revelation? So it's interesting to say that Baha'u'llah has come to guide men and women to their true spiritual heritage, and that in that process, he says, we have to push away carnal passion of all sorts. He commands us to marry men and women to bring forth the continuation of the human race. So that's clear. But act with moderation with regard to human passions. So in a sense, this idea of if I'm not in love with my wife, or if I was in love and now I'm not in love anymore and I better find somebody else, this is not the Baha'i concept of marriage. Paul says he abhors divorce. We've got to stick with each other. And sticking with each other develops saintly qualities, I can tell you that, after 58 years of marriage. And sometimes my wife was growing, sometimes I was growing. I don't know, I hope at least that. It's an interesting development. But the idea that he's set out a set of teachings which lifts us into a spiritual reality that we wouldn't have otherwise. And it doesn't have a whole lot to do with gender differences and so on. He says, in fact, he says clearly, there's a tablet from Abdu'l-Baha, he said that the soul has no sex. It's assigned sex at the moment of conception. So, from that point of view, you can't say the woman has an inferior soul, because he said clearly that it doesn't. And that in the other realm, it retains the learnings, the implications is, as far as I'm understanding, is that learnings that it's had by being either a man or a woman, it retains it and it goes to the next world, and that polarity continues to exist in the next world, in the sense of you may be with your spouse forever and ever, or Shoghi Effendi says in a letter, you may not. You get there if you're not spiritually united sufficiently to go forward in the best way. You'll find new partners without divorce. It's because there's spiritual like seeks like, and the company of its kind. It's a verse from the Hidden Words. The implications of that is you'll be looking for like-minded souls that are in the same condition when you get to the next world. So if you're a black-hearted liar, you'll be attracted to all those people. That'll be interesting company, won't it? Yeah.